Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. This is Beyond Wisdom, aka Flawed Excuses, aka Beyond Broken 78 on PlayStation, Twitter, and Xbox. When it comes to video games, do you assume race has some issues to deal with it? Well, an MIT technology review written by Tanya Basso states some correlation between race, blame, video games, mass shootings, stuff like that. This is from thetechnologyreview.com. Her article is dated the 16th of September 2019. It's from the Humans of Technology. The connection between video games and mass shootings isn't just wrong, it's racist. When a perpetrator is a young white man, people blame video games. If he's black, people make up a troublingly racist narrative. Video games have been wrongly blamed for all sorts of violent behavior, including mass shootings. A new report suggests that not only is that mistaken, it's based on deep-seated assumptions about race. The paper published today in the Journal of Psychology of Popular Media Culture draws its conclusions from a pair of experiments. In the first, researchers analyzed over 200,000 news articles about 204 mass shootings obtained from Stanford University's Mass Shootings in America project for the last 4 decades. The other was a study in which 169 college students were asked to read fictionalized accounts of a shooting and then discuss what they thought caused it. In the experiment, with students, participants who were 88% white and 65% female, read a fabricated account of an 18-year-old male shooter said to be obsessed with video games. Half the participants' stories included a mug shot of an African-American male. The other half were handed a mug shot of a white male. The students were asked to rank their agreement, 1 being strongly disagree, 7 being strongly agree, with 2 statements that the perpetrator's history of playing violent video games probably played a factor in committing the crime, and that the perpetrator's crime was not related to violent video games. Patrick Markey, a co-author of the study and director of the Interpersonal Research Laboratory in Villanova University, said he found a small but statistically significant difference between the number of people who strongly agree that video games were a factor in the case of the white shooter and those who said the same about the black shooter. The second study, the analysis of media coverage, used LexisNexis keyword searches to analyze thousands of articles for the past 40 years. It showed that journalists painted different pictures of criminal intentions depending on a shooter's race. In fact, video games were more than 8 times more likely to be mentioned in a news article regarding a suspected shooter who was white. Both these studies showed that we see interest and discussion of video games of white perpetrators, but we are more comfortable looking at other explanations for other minority groups, said James Ivory, one of the researchers at Virginia Tech. What's going on, Ivory says, it's a lot more complicated than simple racism. There are a lot of us out there who think we don't have a racist cell in our body, but we are comfortable looking at certain explanations for violence and crime over others, he says. That, Ivory says, is implicit bias, the psychological phenomenon of unconsciously attributing some, usually unfounded, stereotype quality of a specific group, like Asians are better at math, for example. Violent video games don't beget violence. Christopher Ferguson, a psychology professor at Stetson University, performed one of the most extensive meta-analyses of video games and violence in 2015 and found no conclusive evidence that violent video games lead to mental health issues, increased anxiety or depression, or any other tendencies that could lead to violent behavior. The easy, but often wrong, explanation is that video games made them do it. Ferguson says this paper, which wasn't involved in, reminds me of the Grand Theft Auto fallacy, a concept he coined together with Markey. It suggests that there's a tendency to link violent video games with violent crimes, whether or not any of the evidence of this link exists. When this sort of thing shows up in a news article that speculates on the case of why a shooter may have committed mass murder, it may not seem very important in the context of the crimes themselves. But a black person might face injustices down the line because of such stereotypes, including being dealt harsher sentences or being fingered as a suspect in the first place. For an African American or Latino male, it's not violent video games, it's inner-city crime or gang violence, as opposed to what's supposed to be expected from these neighborhoods. But when you look at a white kid from a reasonably affluent neighborhood, we are more inclined to see external attributions for committing the crime. People wonder what would make a nice white kid commit this crime. They think something corrupted them. The false link between video games and violence has cropped up in the gun violence debate for years, and it has been debunked in study after study. Ferguson and Ivory each suggested it's a red herring, diverting attention from a real issue in mass shootings, which is gun control. The conversation is not really about video games at all, Ivory says. Video games are brought up when politicians don't want to talk about the other things, like firearm policy. When you hear discussions about video games and violence, it has more to do with that, and that the politicians don't want to talk about. As hard as it's been to stamp out the conversation, though, the racial biases that people barely notice, they will have by far harder ways to eliminate it. Yeah, this article makes some decent points. It's really great to talk about stuff like this though too, because sometimes that actually is. It seems to be like a scapegoat for certain things. See, I just came across this article. I wanted it to be a topic of discussion, and I hope you understand where I'm coming from this, and where they're coming from this point. Again, this is Beyond Wisdom, and I hope you find this informative, and again, I do hope you have a great night, and have an awesome time. Thank you.